Hello, everybody, and welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict show. So good to see you guys. As I said yesterday, we'll be doing a live, like we're doing right now, of course, about the elections in Philippines and why is that important for you to know. But before I launch into discussion, of course, please, if this is your first time to our channel, please subscribe if you have not done so. And also want to remind you about our upcoming master class that's going to be around the 19th or 20th. I know I just asked Elizabeth this morning, and she said, yeah, it's around the 19th. So I'll put the link for you for that. And for our members, if you are one of our members watching this live stream, be on the lookout on Thursday for a very important presentation that Ross and I were going to do. So I look forward to that. Anyway, let's jump to our topic, guys, because, excuse me, the elections in Philippines are very, very interesting, shall we say, for many dynamics, especially in the region, of course. But of course, we know what's going on between China and the US and how Philippines play a role into that. So today, I'm going to put my geopolitical analyst hat on and just provide you a brief readout into where I see things moving forward within the next 6 years, shall we say. But here's the thing. I want you to keep in mind three things. First of all, is what kind of leader the Marcos Jr. is going to be. Second thing is regarding the U.S.-Philippines Visiting Forces Agreement, known as VFA, which we all know what happened in 2020 when Duterte threatened to cancel that, but he reversed course in 2021. And the last thing to keep in mind has to do with the management of the regional geopolitical landscape, knowing the tension that exists between Philippines and China, because we have to keep that in perspective to understand the big picture, as I always say. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I am going to provide a brief, what shall we say, a bio, if you will, about the new president of Philippines and also the vice president, because it's very, very important to understand those dynamics. And in my opinion, usually the tickets, the president and vice president gives you an idea about what to expect. So of course, we can't deny the fact, and it is a fact, that the decisive victory of Ferdinand Marcos Jr., he's known also by the acronym of BBM, in the Philippines presidential elections, just yesterday. Yeah, this win is set to, in my opinion, reshape Southeast Asian countries' relations with both China and the US, knowing that, and there are reports emanating from some sources that he is seeking closer ties to China than he is to the United States. But don't bet on that, because things could change, as we saw back in the 80s. And this is why it's important to provide that snapshot about who Marcos Jr. is and who Sara Duterte is, and how this new team is going to lead Philippines moving forward. Because Filipinos deserve a lot, like every other population in other nations. I had a chance to interact with some individuals from Philippines, wonderful people, down to earth. I was even invited to visit Mandalao, which is a beach area. I just didn't get a chance to do it. So maybe one day down the road. So here's the thing. Of course, we should not, as I always say, fairness is very important. You gotta be fair in everything you do, because it's the right thing to do. So just because Marcos Jr. is the son of a former dictator, we shouldn't paint him in that picture as well. We all know how reality is. We all have some members of our families that kind of the black sheep, shall we say, or someone who get on the wrong path, whatever. Are we gonna paint the entire family that way? No. And this is what I am saying. Let's be fair and let's give a guy a chance to see if he truly is going to hold his own as far as doing good by the Filipino people, because only the Filipino people can judge him, not us. I'm not a Filipino, so who am I to judge the guy? And I will not, because I don't judge people. I don't have that right to do so. So the son of the late dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, of course, and the daughter of the outgoing President Duterte are now the new leaders of the Philippines. It's an interesting alliance that will, in my opinion, usher in within the next 6 years, because that's where the president term is, 6 years. That has, of course, some individuals or organizations, especially when it comes down to human rights activists, concerned. Well, yeah, they will be. But at the same time, isn't that the issue with other countries as well? We can't just pick on one country. And this is where I see the double standard sometimes. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the individual Marcos Jr., what he's going to do for Philippines. So as you may know, he was a former provincial governor. He was a congressman and senator. And he still goes by his childhood name, Bong Bong. I hope I pronounced it correctly. I usually shorten it to BBM. So if I refer to BBM, I'm referring to that. And he has now managed to return the family dynasty or family name to presidency after 36 years. And we all know what happened after the People's Power Revolution that ousted his father and sent him into exile for fledgling billions of dollars and human rights abuses back then. So his mother, Imelda Marcos, twice unsuccessfully attempted to retake the seat of power after returning with her children to the Philippines from the exile in the United States, where her husband, actually, Marcos Sr., died in 1989 in the U.S. So Marcos Jr. has defended his father's legacy, of course. Well, his father, what do you expect? And steadfastly refused to apologize or acknowledge the atrocities and plunder during the dictatorship. Now, once again, who are we to judge? But at the same time, let's set the record straight. If what's been claimed is done, then it will be the responsibility of Marcos Jr., to kind of recognize that and turn that page. Because here is what I always struggle with. When people make mistakes, people in general, why don't they have the gut to come forward and say, hey, I made a mistake. I would like to correct that and turn the page and move on. Because in my opinion, for him to refuse to acknowledge certain, and there were some atrocities, I was aware of some, that's just going to put him in a corner, in a bad position, politically speaking. Was it his fault? No. His dad died, passed away. So why are we going to judge him for that? But at the same time, he needs to do what's right by the Filipino people. That's the way I see it. I have no right to judge the guy, and I will not. And this is why he has stayed during the campaign. He has stayed away from controversies, including one of them that I was very, very familiar with, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., after he took so many billions out of Philippines. So that's why the Marcos Jr. stayed away from this controversy, and especially this past tax conviction, as the Marcos family refused to pay a huge estate tax. And he didn't want to talk about that during the campaign, and that's his prerogative. So he denied accusations that also there was another thing that came up during the campaign, that Marcos Jr. financed a year-long social media campaign that harnessed online troll to smear opponents. and whitewash the Marcos family's choked history. How true that is, I don't know. I don't claim to know. So I cannot speak factually to that because I don't know. The one that I am certain of is the idea of him acknowledging past mistakes. I think it will do him good, politically speaking, that he can be straightforward with the Filipino people. Also, it will boost his image around the world. Remember optics? Very, very important. And usually you will respect a leader that takes a step forward to acknowledge when wrongs are committed. That's the way I see it. If I were advising him, that will be the first thing I would say you're going to need to do before we move to some hot topic issues. So, let's move on to Sara Duterte. Well, Sara Duterte, she's 43 or 44 years old, is the outgoing mayor of Davos City, which was, interestingly, it was her father's constituency before he was elected president in 2016. She's a lawyer by trade, and also she's a reserve officer into the Philippines Army. So she does have some solid background. So Sara Duterte has carved out her own political career. And although at times supportive of her father, is considered more level-headed and pragmatic. And what's interesting about Sara Duterte is that her party originally wanted her to succeed her dad as president. But she chose instead to run for vice president, which I believe it is a smart political move. Pave her way for the next presidential election 6 years from now. She's only 43 or 44, whatever that is. So to me personally, it's a smart move, politically speaking, and position her in a very, very good position, politically speaking, again, to ensure that, she's not an extension of her father, and she's not, or she will not be an extension of the current president, Marcos Sr., Jr., that is, depending on how the guy governs Philippines, which will be very interesting to see as we move forward. So, as I said at the beginning, what kind of leader should not just us outsiders, but the Filipinos expect from Marcos Jr. to be? Well, of course, after his ouster by the largely peaceful demonstrations back in 1986, and I remember that. I was younger than what I am today, but I remember that. So 1986 uprising. And the elder Marcos died in 1989, as I mentioned earlier, while in exile in Hawaii. But here's the thing. He died without admitting any wrongdoing, including accusation that he, Marcos Sr., and family have amassed an estimated $5 billion to $10 billion while he was in power. There were some money left Philippines. As to the amount, it's give or take. There excuse me. There are some other sources indicating different amounts altogether. So, well, what's interesting is that a Hawaiian court later found Marcos Sr. liable for human rights violations and awarded about $2 billion from his estate to compensate more than 9,000 Filipinos. The 9,000 filed a lawsuit against him for incarcerations, extrajudicial killings, and some disappearances and so forth. So his widow, Imelda Marcos, and their children were allowed to return to Philippines, I think in 1990 or 1991, somewhere around that time, and worked on sort of stunning the political comeback that was funded by social media campaign, but it didn't work for the widow at that time. This is why now the return of the Marcos name to the presidency after 36 years, it's a big deal. What can we say? We can't judge it because that's what the Filipino people voted for. We got to respect the outcome. No matter how you look at it, you respect the outcome of the voters. That's to me the way I see it. If we are to talk about through process, whether you want to call it democracy or not, that's beside the point. Where you give a chance to people to vote, then you're going to respect the outcome. And the Filipinos in this incident decided to vote for Marcos Jr. End of story. That's the way I see it. Now, I'm a little bit familiar with his background when he was in the United States because I used to live near a state where he went to school. And that school, it's because he pursued, I believe, a master's in a business administration and the university called Wharton in the School of Business, which is University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. I used to live close to Philadelphia at the time. So that's what he pursued, his academics. So he felt at that time, and I can see why, because Wharton School of Business, usually it's one of the elites, shall we say. So he felt privileged to enter such an esteemed school. Yeah, he has a good reputation here in the United States. At the same time, he had to cut his studies short because he was elected vice governor of the province of Ilocos Norte in 81. At an early age, he was only about 20, I think 24. 23, 24, somewhere. So he was very, very young. So he succeeded as a governor of the province from 1983, which during his dad was still in power, to 1986. So that's what I found very, very interesting about all this. So now, the other aspects that I want to talk to you about, it has to do with the Philippines-U.S. Forces agreement, the status, United States, the visiting forces agreement. So, well, as we know, this agreement, of course, for the U.S. to have its military presence, which we all know why. Philippines is in a strategic location. Access to the waters and so forth. It's very, very, very strategic. But as of, I think, February 2020, at that time, the current president, not the current, I'm sorry, the former president, Rodrigo Duterte, formally, at that time, announced to the, to the American embassy in Manila that he was ending the pact, this agreement. And he even suggested at that time, and I remember reading down back then, that he will give about 180 days for its termination to take effect. And let's agree on some other clauses with it. What's interesting enough is that after a meeting of Duterte and the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and the meeting, I believe, took place in July or August, I think July 2021. After that, President Duterte sort of retracted his statement and agreed for the extension of the U.S. agreement there. What was in it? I don't know. All I know is that at that time, Duterte, because I do remember him doing an interview in which he was asked, are you going to go against the U.S.? And I said, and the interviewer asked him, well, are you going to go with China? Or are you going to go against China? And his answer was, and I quote, because I still remember the word, he said, are you asking me to commit suicide? Basically fighting China. That's what he was referring to. On the other hand, someone mentioned, remark that, well, if he goes against the United States, he knows what the outcome is going to be. So you guys can read between the lines. So here's the thing. With the new president, Marcos Jr., depending, in my opinion, depending on how the bilateral relations of the Philippines and the US proceeds, whether he is going to renegotiate the Mutual Defense Treaty, if it will ever remain an option. I am not sure yet. It will be very interesting to see. And I don't want to jump to this conclusion because he just took over 48 hours ago. So it's too early. Yes, when a presidential candidates are running for office, they tend to say what voters wants to hear. When they are faced with the reality, is a different ballgame. And I'm telling you this from experience. So no matter what you read, and this is why I wanted to get on the air and share this with you right away before you start reading headline, because you're going to be reading a lot about it, how now the West, the US mainly, and China is going to now compete for Philippines, and what Philippines is going to do. So, because Marcos Jr. is going to be faced with the reality. The geopolitical dynamics have changed. And funny, it's just like 3 or 4 months ago. You know, the time when he was running the campaign is different than the current time when he is now officially president. The dynamics on the not only the regional landscape but also global one have changed, and he's gonna have to think now in terms of the strategic interest of the Philippines, and that will be very interesting for him to decide which path is gonna go, assuming that his advisors are level-headed. But that's not what I see coming. What I see coming is the military establishment within Philippines that really can redirect the policies. That reminds me of Pakistan. It's no different than the army. And that will be very interesting to to see how this is going to develop. Okay. Let me do a brief analysis about the whole setting of how it's going to be. Then I'm going to move into the regional landscape. I'll provide the conclusion and question of the day. So as I said earlier, there are some reports coming out emanating from Manila, and this within some circles of analysts, academia, some within the defense industry, but that could be just hot air. It's too early to tell. Common sense suggests it's too early to tell. That does not mean Marcos Jr. does not, or BBM, I'm going to be calling him from now on BBM. That does not mean he does not have an idea or strategy how he's going to proceed. So, because here's the thing. Philippines has the long-standing ties with China. And the question that we need to ask ourselves is BBM going to be now seeking a new deal with the President Xi of China? Over what? Not trade, is over the contested waters of the South China Sea. Because that is what's at the heart of which direction I believe Philippines is going to go. If he can work that out with China peacefully, that will be to his benefit. And that remains to be seen. Because, as I said earlier, he just got into office. It's too early to tell. Because there's going to be so many advice coming to him from different directions. And as you may know, and I am sure you do, you're smart enough to know, like in every government, there are entities that can push for certain agendas. And we are witnessing that right now here when it comes down to the Eastern Europe conflict. I do foresee the same thing happening in Philippines. So this is on one hand, Philippines ties or relations with China. So, or Marcos Jr. expectations with China. Marcos Jr. relations with the United States, on the other hand, are very complicated. And why they are complicated? They are complicated by the contempt of the court order for his refusal to cooperate with the District Court of Hawaii. And as I said earlier, because it was in 1995, the court ordered the Marcos family to pay $2 billion of plundered wealth that was taken away from Filipino people. And the family has benefited from. So, call a spade a spade. We gotta be fair and realistic. Filipino people deserve what's right for them. Of course, I remember, and I did put this one down on my Russia book when I talked about South China Sea. I did mention something about that. It was a decision, I think, by the court at the time in 2016 under international law of the sea that ruled in favor of Philippines regarding China's claim. Of course, China didn't recognize that and seized upon other claimants such as the United States because he was pushing for the same outcome. But China wasn't concerned with all that stuff and moved forward with the building of the military installations on the island. And this is why I say it's very important that Marcos Jr. works out the differences with China. It's no different what I've said earlier in previous videos about India working its differences with China regarding Ladakh. It's a win-win for everybody. I'm not saying that Philippines should be scared of China. I'm not saying, no. That's beside the point. All I'm saying is, if they can sit down at the negotiating table and peacefully resolve the issue, it will be a win-win for everybody. It's because it's very important. Well, what I found very interesting is that, and I remember I was following this for quite a while. I usually didn't say much about it because I wasn't certain as to what the outcome of the elections at that time would be. But I was listening from time to time and reading up on some transcripts about what was going on in Philippines at that time. So here is what's interesting. During one of the interviews, Marcos said that the ruling regarding the international law was not effective because China did not recognize it. So, and what he will do if he becomes a president is that he will seek a bilateral agreement with China to resolve their differences. And this is why I say it's too early to assume that the new president is going to certainly embark on this policy or that policy. It's too early. You can, pragmatically speaking, you can jump to that conclusion. Just give him a month. Let's see how things progresses, because I am sure there will be talks behind closed doors. And I will tell you why when I talk about the regional landscape, not the global one, the regional one, that is. So this is what I see moving forward. On the other hand, there were voices telling him that, hey, if you let the United States come in, you're going to make an enemy of China. And this is why I said he's going to have to navigate. Hey, you the one who wanted to run for president. That comes with a responsibility. You are now responsible for the welfare of the Filipino people and the strategic interests of Philippines. So you're going to have to guide. And this is why I said earlier, we shall not judge him because his family name or because of what his dad did. Give a guy a chance and let's see how he's going to proceed. He's smart enough to see where the dynamics are headed. If you can read between the lines. So I do believe, and this is my personal opinion, and of course I could be wrong, and if I turns out to be wrong, I will come on the air and admit it, because there's no shame into that. To me, that's where humility is. I think, he's going to reach an agreement with China. That's the way I see it working. Because I've seen all the trends leading into that direction as far as the landscape changes in that part of the world. And and Philippines won't want to be left behind. Because remember, all ASEAN countries are moving into that direction except one country. So, as a matter of fact, he had some friends at the Chinese embassy home he had a talk with, and they've been talking about this particular path. So that's why I'm seeing it go in that direction. Basically, what BBM wants is he wants a friendlier ties with China, except not at the expense of ceding territory. And this is where I see him sitting down at the negotiating table with China and work out their differences. I believe he will be open to direct consultations and bilateral negotiations with China to settle those differences. It's just common sense, because that would be the right course of action. Once again, hypothetically, if I were advising him, that's probably what I would advise him to do, because it's the common sense action to take to resolve that issue. Because also there is another alternative, or not alternative, but another reason for why he will do that. He will do that because he is also willing to explore other areas of cooperation with China, including the development of natural gas and oil in the West Philippine Sea. And this is why I'm saying it's a win-win if he plays his cards right. Here's the thing. The West Philippine Sea, okay, is within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone in the South China Sea, which is also claimed by China. So that is why it makes common sense, politically speaking, for him to sit down and resolve this ASAP, not a year from today. The reason being because a year from today, the dynamics will be different, and they are going to be different. Mark my word on it. The other important thing for Marcos Jr. to keep in mind is that he needs to attract investments from China for his ambitious infrastructure agenda that he promised Filipino people. And that's going to be very, very important because, like he said, and I quote this because I remember it, as I said, pardon me, earlier, I used to read up on his statements and all that stuff. And he said, "Judge me by my action, not my family name," which is a realistic statement, and I will agree with it. We don't judge people by their family names and status, and all that stuff is irrelevant. I judge you by your action. I judge you whether you are telling the truth or not. That's the way I look at it. This is what we do, at least in this channel. I hope. Two things. Because we want to expand the knowledge. We want to expand your knowledge to be aware of what's going on. And of course, the truth. Because they matter. And once you understand those, because the impact of it, because this geopolitics in conflict show is not about just geopolitics, guys. I think you figured that out by now. It touches on the business side. It touches on your finances. It touches on your human behavior. It touches on your, understanding, awareness. There are so many facets to it. Yes, we wrapped everything under geopolitical term, but it has so many branches to it. Because geopolitics is not limited only to politics. And you know this. And geopolitics is not limited only to the top layer of society, politicians. It trickles down to you and I, average citizens, regardless of what part of the world you're in. And this is what I see. The Marcos Jr. understanding this dynamics and playing his cards right. Because he's going to have to. Because that neighborhood is going to be changing big time. And a year from today, things will be different. So, because here's the thing, once again, I'm a student of history. If we look at the history of Marcos Sr., he ruled the Philippines for almost 20 years, until 1986, and was close U.S. ally. But he began to engage with China after diplomatic relations were established in 1975. That just changes the dynamics. That's what's interesting. And I found out something about Marcos Jr. regarding this era. At that time, it was a year earlier than 1975. Marcos Jr., he was at the time, he was 18 years of age. He went with his mother, Imelda, to Beijing, in a historic trip at that time, which paved the way for a diplomatic détente between the two countries. That was very, very, very interesting, And it was right around that era when the U.S. has upped its engagements in Southeast Asia. And of course, in recent months, especially in the Philippines, the U.S. has upped its military engagements. Because in March and April, more than 5,000 U.S. soldiers or military personnel undertook military maneuvers or exercises, shall we say, with Philippine counterparts. What was interesting about it? It was the largest in 7 years. That's what was interesting. What does it mean? Put in my geopolitical analyst hat. What does it mean? All it means is that these military maneuvers highlighted how strategic Philippines is. And that's why when the former president, Duterte, said he wants to build strong ties with China and cut off the status of U.S. forces, a year later, he changed his mind. Yeah, it's just the way it works. That's how political issues are. I do believe that Marcos Jr., he might encounter, and again, this is just my own opinion, he might encounter some issues with the United States. But like what Duterte experienced when he issued that declaration or statement that he's going to have to terminate the status of American forces there, the military establishment didn't let it happen. I believe the same thing is going to happen to Marcos Jr. And he will face constraint from the bureaucrats in the military. Because if you know the back door about the U.S.-Philippine military ties, you will understand what I'm referring to here. There's another issue that looms large. Whether, I don't know how it's going to be resolved. And it has to do with Marcos Jr., of course. The last time he's been in the U.S. was about 15 or almost 20 years ago, whatever. But now he will be concerned about coming to the U.S. Why? Fearful of the consequences given he and his mother are facing a contempt of court or ruling and a $353 million fine, which means what? He will be arrested. But this is, by the way, in addition to the $2 billion payout that his mother have been ordered to pay. So, but what I do expect is that because he's a president, he will be given immunity. That's just a protocol within international law. I think he will be granted diplomatic immunity if he ever visits the United States. And there is nothing wrong with that, because that's a protocol most countries gets involved in. That's just the norm. That's what I see. Let's talk about briefly here. Let's talk about the regional landscape because it's very important for you guys to understand that. Excuse me. Asia, as you know, is a region with a growing political and economic significance to the world. You know, we all know that. It's a fact. It's reality. Let's not sugarcoat it or try to whatever. So, because it is rapidly expanding, the economy is now contributing to 2/3 of global growth and accounts for nearly 40% of global output. And I will put the link for you guys for the stats so you can take a look at it. So politically, also Asia is the home to the world emerging power, China, you know, which of course challenges America's dominance. So these worldwide ramifications are threatened by the geopolitical tensions as the US balances against China's expanding influence in Asia. And this is why I'm saying Philippines will play a crucial role, like India, just from a different angles or different perspectives. So the main issue, the geopolitical one that is, the main issue within Asia, it's not the political landscape, it's the maritime disputes over South China Sea, whether it will be resolved in a peaceful way or not. That is where the key issue. And that's gonna sort of pave the way, because let's be straightforward about it. And I think we're gonna do this on our other platform because we can talk more freely. The American century is coming to an end. I wish American people will wake up to the reality of what lies ahead, especially when it comes down to the financial aspects. And I'm going to do a video about the financial aspects because it's very, 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 very problematic what lies ahead. And the reason, as I said earlier, why do we do all this? Because we want you to be aware and so you can have a plan and prepare for what's need to be done. That is the whole objective to it. So let me provide the conclusion here, guys, and then I'll provide the question for the day. So here's the thing. Geopolitically speaking, the competition between the United States and China in Asia is most present in the efforts taken by each power. In what way, you may ask? It will be in a way to develop close security partnership with regional countries. That's why Philippines is going to be in the middle between the two meaning China and the US, and Marcos Jr. will have to really, really make the right decisions that is good for his country. Because there are some serious ramifications with wider regional security landscape. And you look at it no further than what was illustrated, for example, with the failure, yes, I will use the term, with the failure of the 10 members nation of ASEAN group. When they couldn't come to an agreement on a joint communique on how to deal with the issue of South China Sea. Because they couldn't, each one of them looking at different. To me, that's an indication of what lies ahead. And remember, this wasn't last year. This was about 10 years ago. This is why I said the regional landscape is going to be very crucial. And I hope Philippines will have a good read into where things are headed. It's already seeing the trend, for example, with ASEAN wanted to stay neutral for a good reason. And that's why how I see it moving forward. And because this failure of the agreement, in part to China's, it's sort of the result of China's strong economic and political influence, for example, in countries like Cambodia, which drove the whole idea to prevent that communique from being agreed upon. At the same time, while all this happening, the United States is making inroads in gaining stronger foothold in the region. Because it's no secret. We don't know. And the one country that I keep in mind has to do with Myanmar, which was interesting enough. And the objective for that, which is, again, doesn't take a genius to figure it out, it's to wane away Myanmar from dependence on China. Straightforward. That's basically where the reason why. So here's the thing. Philippines is a fulcrum of the geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States. That's why I said Marcos Jr. is going to have a lot on his plate. And because the wrong decision is going to take Philippines in the wrong path. And with its maritime territory as part of the South China Sea, which is a strategic and resourceful rich waterways, it behooves Marcos Jr. to really reach some sort of an agreement with China sooner than later. Because a year from today, the landscape is going to be very, very different, and it will be too late by then. So I hope he does it very, very soon. So let me present to you the question of the day. And by the way, the question we had last time about Saudi Arabia pivoting east, majority says yes. I would not concur with that 100% because it will depend on how the outcome of the succession ends up. We don't know yet. Yes, there is a crown prince in place. That doesn't guarantee. Go back to 1975. It was a king in place. He didn't survive. So I see your arguments and I concur with it, but I will not concur with it 100%. So here's the question of the day. How will ASEAN countries perceive Marcos Jr. election or governors or presidency? And the second question is, will Marcos Jr. preserve U.S.-Philippine alliance but keep his options open? Let me repeat. Question 1. How will ASEAN countries perceive Marcos Jr. presidency or elections, whatever you want to call it? Second question is, will Marcos Jr. preserve U.S.-Philippines alliance but keep his options open? I look forward to reading your comments on it. As always, guys, stay informed. Till next time. Bye-bye.